In the hills of San Jose, California, stands a mansion that defies every rule of architecture and logic. 7 stories of twisted corridors, staircases that climb straight into solid ceilings, and doors that open onto deadly drops. This is the Winchester Mystery House, and its story begins not with blueprints or grand designs, but with a rifle that changed the course of American history and left one woman convinced that the dead were hunting her. The Winchester rifle earned its reputation as the gun that won the West. 15 rounds without reloading, lightning-fast lever action that could clear a battlefield or drop a charging buffalo before the animal knew what hit it. But every innovation in killing technology creates winners and losers, and Sarah Winchester found herself on both sides of that equation. She inherited a fortune built on death, millions of dollars flowing from a weapon that had claimed countless lives across the American frontier. Native warriors, Union and Confederate soldiers, outlaws and lawmen, settlers and the wildlife they hunted to near extinction. All of them connected by Winchester steel, and all of their blood money flowing into the pockets of one small, grieving widow who would spend the next 4 decades trying to build her way out of a curse. This is the dark story of America's most haunted mansion, a tale of guilt, grief, and construction that never stopped. Where hammers rang out 24 hours a day for 38 years, where workers built rooms that served no purpose, and hallways that led nowhere, all because one woman believed that if she ever stopped building, she would die. If you enjoy deep investigations into America's strangest architectural mysteries, hit that like button and subscribe. Your support makes these detailed explorations possible, and I promise you've never heard the Winchester story told quite like this. The woman who would one day build the most confusing house in America started life as Sarah Lockwood Pardee, born in 1839 to a respected Connecticut family. She was educated, cultured, and fluent in multiple languages. At 23, she married William Wirt Winchester, heir to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company fortune. It should have been a fairy tale beginning. The Winchester mansion in New Haven was everything money could buy. Crystal chandeliers imported from Europe, servants in starched uniforms, dinner parties where Connecticut's elite gathered to discuss business and politics. Sarah played her role perfectly, the quiet, dignified wife who managed the household while her husband expanded the family empire. But there was always something unsettling about the source of their wealth. Every chandelier, every silk dress, every fine meal was paid for with money earned from instruments of death. The Winchester rifle had become America's weapon of choice, and that choice was generating staggering profits. By the 1860s, the Winchester family was among the wealthiest in the nation. Sarah never spoke publicly about how she felt watching her comfortable life built on violence. Friends later said she asked uncomfortable questions. How many had died? How many families had been destroyed by the weapons that funded their luxury? The questions had no good answers, and the money kept flowing. Then tragedy struck with surgical precision. In 1866, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, Annie Pardee Winchester, a healthy, bright-eyed baby who became the center of Sarah's universe. For 6 weeks, Sarah experienced the joy she had always imagined motherhood would bring. Then Annie contracted marasmus, a wasting disease that slowly drained the life from infants. Sarah watched helplessly as her daughter faded, holding her as she died. The grief was absolute. Sarah withdrew from society, stopped attending the social functions that had once defined her life. She barely spoke for months. The empty nursery became a shrine to a future that would never exist. William tried to comfort her, but loss like that creates distances that love alone cannot bridge. They never had another child. 15 years passed in the shadow of that loss. Then in 1881, William contracted tuberculosis. Sarah nursed him through the slow decline, watching another person she loved waste away despite all the money in the world. William died, leaving Sarah alone at 42, childless, and the sole heir to a fortune worth roughly $20 million. In today's money, that would be close to $500 million. blood money, as she had begun to think of it. Every dollar earned from weapons that had killed Native Americans defending their land, soldiers fighting for causes they believed in, and countless others caught in the crossfire of American expansion. Sarah could not sleep. Night after night in the New Haven mansion, she lay awake in rooms that felt too large and too empty. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind against the windows felt like someone trying to get in. Her family worried, her friends offered comfort. But grief like that does not respond to polite concern. This is where spiritualism entered her life and changed everything. The 1880s were the golden age of American spiritualism. Séances filled parlors across the country. Mediums claimed they could reach across the veil between life and death, bringing back voices and messages from beyond. For people like Sarah, educated and religious but shattered by loss, spiritualism offered something traditional Christianity could not: the possibility of contact, of answers, of hearing her daughter's voice one more time. The exact details vary depending on the source, but most accounts agree on the essential facts. A friend brought Sarah to a medium, possibly in Boston, possibly in New Haven. The medium told Sarah she was cursed. Not by God, not by fate, but by the spirits of everyone killed by Winchester rifles, thousands of them, tens of thousands. Native Americans, soldiers, settlers, hunters. All of them restless, all of them angry, and all of them drawn to the family that had profited from their deaths. The medium claimed the spirits had already taken Sarah's husband and child, and they would take her too unless she did something to appease them. She had to move west, as far from New Haven as possible. She had to buy a house and build constantly, without stopping, because as long as the house remained unfinished, the spirits would be confused, forced to wander, distracted, unable to find her. The moment construction stopped, the medium warned, Sarah would die. Most people would have dismissed this as nonsense, the ravings of a charlatan preying on a grieving widow. But Sarah did not dismiss it. Whether she believed every word or simply clung to a structure that gave her grief a purpose, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. In 1884, Sarah sold the New Haven mansion. She packed her belongings, said goodbye to the life she had known, and boarded a train heading west. She did not tell most of her family where she was going. She simply left, traveling across the country through farmland and prairie, over mountains and desert until she reached California. In San Jose, surrounded by orchards and morning fog, she found an unfinished farmhouse. 8 rooms, 2 stories, nothing special at first glance, just a wooden structure sitting on 40 acres of fruit trees. She bought it for what would be millions in today's money, and then she hired carpenters. The work began in 1886, and for the next 38 years, it never stopped. The hammering started before dawn and continued past sunset. Day crews worked under the California sun while night crews labored by lamplight, the sound of their tools echoing through the orchards. Neighbors said you could hear the construction at all hours. Some said it sounded like a heartbeat. Sarah herself remained mostly hidden, moving through the house at odd hours, inspecting work, leaving notes, changing plans. Workers described finding sketches on brown paper, sometimes verbal instructions delivered by the foreman, sometimes nothing at all except orders to tear down what they had finished yesterday and start again from scratch. This was not how normal construction worked. Most building projects operated only during daylight hours. Working at night was inefficient and dangerous. But Sarah did not care about efficiency. She cared about continuity. The house had to keep growing every single day because stopping meant death. The workers stayed because Sarah paid better than anyone else in the valley. A skilled carpenter could make $2 a day working on farms or public buildings. Sarah paid $3, sometimes more for specialized work, and she paid every week in cash without fail. In an era when work was uncertain and wages were often delayed, that reliability was worth more than gold. She also fed them. Hot meals prepared by her kitchen staff and carried out to the scaffolding and work sites. Industrial-scale refrigeration kept meat fresh. Provisions were purchased in bulk. During the economic depressions of the 1890s, when families went hungry and desperate, working for Sarah Winchester was not just employment, it was survival. The house grew according to no plan anyone could understand. 8 rooms became 20. 20 became 40. Wings extended in multiple directions. A grand ballroom was added, then sealed off and never used. A conservatory appeared with stained glass windows imported from Europe. But the oddities multiplied faster than the normal rooms. Doors were installed that opened onto blank walls. Cabinets were built only 1 inch deep, decorative and useless. A chimney rose 4 stories and stopped just short of the roof, venting into the attic instead of the open air. One door on the 2nd floor opened directly onto empty air, a 15-foot drop, into the garden below. No balcony, no staircase, just a threshold and a potentially deadly fall. A tiny staircase with steps only 2 inches high rose slowly over 44 steps to climb barely 9 feet, taking forever to get nowhere. None of it made conventional sense, but the paychecks always cleared, and in Sarah Winchester's world, that was all that mattered. Local newspapers began paying attention. They called it the Winchester Mystery House, the mansion where the widow kept crews working day and night on a building project that defied explanation. Reporters tried to interview Sarah. She refused. Guards were hired to keep trespassers off the property. The gates stayed locked, but rumors slipped through anyway, and they were about to get much darker. Deep inside the growing maze, there was a room Sarah visited every night. The servants called it the séance room. A small, unremarkable space tucked deep in the center of the house where no outside walls touched it. No natural light reached it. Getting there required navigating a specific route through hidden passages, past doors disguised as cabinets, down corridors barely wide enough for one person. Once inside, the room felt wrong in ways visitors struggled to articulate. 13 hooks lined one wall, evenly spaced, holding nothing at all. No coats ever hung there. No tools. Just 13 iron hooks that seemed to wait for something that never came. The room had 1 entrance, but 3 exits. One door led back the way you came. Another opened into a completely different hallway. The third was a trap, a false door that would send anyone who opened it carelessly tumbling 8 feet into a storage room below. In the center sat a cabinet where Sarah reportedly kept robes and objects used in her nightly rituals. What kind of objects? The servants would not say or did not know. A bell system connected this room to Sarah's bedroom. The first bell rang at midnight, the hour when Sarah believed the veil between worlds was thinnest. The second rang at 2 a.m, 13 chimes to send the spirits away. Workers who stayed late claimed they heard the bells, heard footsteps in the hallways afterward, heard Sarah's voice faint and muffled as if she were speaking to someone in a language they could not quite understand. But no one ever witnessed what happened inside that room. Sarah never explained it, never confirmed or denied the séances that supposedly took place there. The only hints came from servants who worked in the house for years. One housekeeper said Sarah spent hours alone in the séance room, sometimes sitting in complete darkness, sometimes lighting candles that burned with strange colors. Another claimed Sarah received instructions during these sessions, architectural plans, directions for the next phase of construction, warnings about which rooms to avoid. Whether Sarah truly believed she was communicating with the dead, or whether the séance room was simply a place where she could retreat and grieve in private, no one knew. What everyone could see was that the house kept changing based on decisions Sarah made in the darkness. Rooms that were finished one week would be sealed off the next. Entire wings that took months to build were suddenly closed, doors nailed shut, furniture removed, as if something had happened there that Sarah wanted to forget or contain. The workers learned not to ask questions. They learned to follow new plans even when those plans seemed to contradict everything they had been told the day before. Because the alternative was losing the best job any of them had ever had. By 1900, if you had walked into the Winchester house, you would not have made it 10 feet before getting lost. The front door, when Sarah bothered to designate a front door at all, opened into a hallway that immediately split in 3 directions. Each path looked identical. The same wallpaper, the same lighting, the same wooden floors that creaked under your weight. Pick the wrong direction, and you would find yourself walking in circles. Some hallways literally looped back on themselves, designed so that anyone following them would end up exactly where they started, convinced they had traveled much farther than they actually had. Other hallways dead-ended abruptly. You would turn a corner expecting another passage, and instead face a blank wall. No door, no window, just wallpaper, and the growing realization that you were trapped in someone else's architectural nightmare. The staircases were worse. Sarah's arthritis had grown severe, so she commissioned staircases with steps only 2 inches tall. One rose 44 steps to climb just 9 feet, each step so shallow you barely lifted your foot. To visitors unfamiliar with the house, it felt surreal, like climbing forever without getting anywhere. Another staircase rose 7 steps, turned at a landing, and slammed directly into the ceiling. No attic access, no hidden door, just wood and plaster. The workers had built it according to Sarah's specifications, then stopped, waiting for further instructions that never came. Doors were everywhere. Eventually, there would be 2,000 of them. Some opened into ordinary rooms, others opened into walls, a few opened into other doors, creating the bizarre experience of turning a handle, pushing, and finding yourself face to face with the back of another door just inches away. Windows faced other windows across narrow courtyards, offering views not of the outside world, but of other rooms in the same house. Some windows were installed at floor level, nearly causing visitors to trip over panes of glass that looked down into basements or up into rafters. The ballroom was perhaps the strangest space of all. Grand and beautiful with parquet floors and stained glass windows worth thousands of dollars. 2 pipe organs dominated the room. Sarah loved music and reportedly played alone at night when no one else was in the house. There was space for 100 guests, but Sarah never held a ball, never invited anyone to dance. The stained glass windows in the ballroom featured spider webs, intricate and beautiful designs of webs glistening with morning dew. Spiders appeared throughout the house, carved into woodwork, embedded in tile work, woven into iron grates. Sarah believed spiders were good luck, that they trapped evil spirits the way they trapped flies. So she filled her house with their images, creating a web made of wood and glass and stone. But the house itself had become a web. Hallways tangled together, rooms layered on top of rooms, passages twisted back on themselves until even the people who built them could not always remember the correct route. By 1906, the Winchester house had grown to over 100 rooms, 7 stories at its tallest point. Then, on April 18th at 5:12 in the morning, the earth moved. The great San Francisco earthquake of 1906 struck with devastating force. Magnitude 7.9, it became one of the deadliest natural disasters in American history. San Francisco, 60 miles to the north, took the worst of it. Buildings collapsed, fires erupted, more than 3,000 people died within minutes. But San Jose felt it too. At the Winchester house, the ground rolled like a wave. Chimneys cracked and toppled, windows shattered throughout the mansion. The 7-story tower, the tallest structure on the property, groaned and swayed as the foundation shifted beneath it. Then it fell. Tons of wood and brick crashed through the floors below, punching through room after room, until the debris settled in a heap of splintered timber and broken glass. Dust filled the hallways. The entire structure creaked and moaned as if it might collapse entirely. Sarah was inside when it happened. She had been sleeping in a bedroom on an upper floor, though which room exactly was unclear because Sarah moved her sleeping quarters frequently, never staying in the same place for more than a few weeks. When the shaking started, she tried to reach the doorway, but the door would not open. The house had shifted. The frame had warped. Sarah pushed, pulled, threw her small frame against the wood. Nothing moved. She was trapped alone in the dark with the building tearing itself apart around her. Servants heard her calling through the walls. They grabbed crowbars and tools, forced their way through debris-choked hallways, and found the jammed door. It took nearly an hour to pry it open and pull Sarah to safety. When they finally freed her, she was shaken, but physically unharmed. Emotionally, something had cracked that could never be repaired. Sarah walked through the damaged house in complete silence. She saw the collapsed tower, the shattered windows, the rooms buried under rubble, walls split open exposing the skeleton of beams and studs underneath. The workers expected her to order repairs, to rebuild the tower, to restore what had been lost. Instead, she told them to seal it off. The entire front section of the house, 30 rooms including the tower and what had been the main entrance, were permanently closed. Doors were nailed shut. Hallways were blocked with furniture and boards. Sarah never entered those rooms again for the remaining 16 years of her life. She did not explain why, but the servants thought they understood. The earthquake was a message, a warning from the spirits she had been trying to appease for 20 years. She had displeased them somehow, built something wrong, invited the wrong kind of attention. The collapse of the tower was not random structural damage, it was punishment. So she sealed the destruction like a wound, left it frozen in time, and moved the construction to other parts of the house. But something fundamental had changed. Before the earthquake, the house had possessed a certain chaotic energy. Strange, yes, but also ambitious. Towers reaching skyward, grand rooms, a sense that Sarah was creating something immense, even if no one understood what it was. After the earthquake, the house turned inward. The earthquake, the house turned inward. New rooms were smaller, hallways narrower. The construction focused on additions that sprawled horizontally rather than vertically, wings that extended across the property instead of rising into the sky. As if Sarah no longer trusted height, as if she wanted to stay closer to the ground where the earth could not betray her again. She also became more reclusive than ever before. Prior to 1906, Sarah occasionally interacted with workers directly, left instructions in person, walked through finished rooms to inspect the craftsmanship. After the earthquake, she retreated almost entirely from human contact. Days would pass without anyone seeing her. Instructions came through intermediaries. Cash appeared in sealed envelopes. The foreman managed the crews while the housekeeper managed the staff, and Sarah moved like a ghost through her own creation. Neighbors reported seeing lights in the windows at strange hours after the earthquake. A single candle flame moving from room to room, floor to floor, as if someone were searching for something they had lost and would never find. The séance room bell still rang at midnight and 2 in the morning, but now there was something heavier in the air. A sense that the house had been marked, that the collapse was not merely structural damage, but proof that Sarah Winchester was right to be afraid, and proof that no amount of building would ever be enough. Most people would have quit after nearly being killed by a collapsing building. The earthquake had revealed just how dangerous working on the Winchester property could be. The house was a maze that made less sense every day. The work was repetitive, bizarre, and seemingly endless. Build a wall, tear it down, build it again somewhere else according to plans that changed without warning or explanation, but the workers stayed. Not because they believed in ghosts or understood Sarah's vision, but for something simpler and far more real in their world. Loyalty earned through steady pay and unusual kindness. Sarah Winchester paid better than almost anyone else in the Santa Clara Valley. When other employers found excuses to dock wages or withhold payment entirely, Sarah's workers received their full pay every Friday without fail. When a carpenter's wife fell ill and medical bills mounted, Sarah quietly increased his wages and told the foreman to excuse him when he needed to leave early. No lengthy explanations required, just simple acknowledgement that life was hard and people needed room to deal with it. When a laborer broke his arm and could not work for 2 months, Sarah kept him on salary anyway. When an elderly maintenance man could barely climb ladders anymore, she gave him lighter duties instead of pushing him out to make room for younger workers. These were not acts of charity, staged for public recognition. Sarah never called newspapers or advertised her generosity. She simply took care of the people who took care of her impossible house. The workers noticed, and they protected her in return. When reporters came around asking questions, trying to peer through windows or climb fences for glimpses of the mad widow, the construction crews turned them away. When neighbors gossiped about strange lights and midnight bells, the workers shrugged and kept their opinions to themselves. Some of them probably thought Sarah was eccentric, possibly unwell, but she was their eccentric employer, and she treated them better than anyone else ever had. So when Sarah asked them to build a staircase that went nowhere, they built it. When she asked them to install a door in the floor, they installed it. And when she asked them to seal off 30 rooms and never speak of what they had seen inside, they sealed the rooms and stayed silent. By 1910, the house had reached its maximum size. Over 160 rooms sprawled across the property in a pattern that defied architectural logic. The largest private residence in California, a mansion that rivaled the estates of railroad barons and mining kings. Yet unlike those grand homes built for entertaining and display, the Winchester house served an audience of one. Sarah had created a world entirely her own, shaped by fears and beliefs that made sense to no one else. Every twisted hallway, every door to nowhere, every window facing another window instead of the outside world, reflected choices that seemed random to visitors, but followed an internal logic only Sarah could understand. The newspapers could not resist such a perfect story. By 1910, Sarah Winchester had become exactly the kind of figure that sold papers. A reclusive widow with a vast fortune, living in a house that made no architectural sense, surrounded by rumors of ghosts, curses, and midnight rituals. The San Francisco Chronicle ran the first major exposé. "Mystery House of Santa Clara Valley," the headline read, with subheadings promising readers the inside story of the mansion built by a woman who fears the spirits of those killed by her family's rifles. The article described sealed rooms, endless construction, and workers who spoke in whispers about bells that rang at 2 a.m. The story spread like wildfire. Other newspapers picked it up, embellished it, added details that may or may not have been true. One claimed Sarah wore a black veil at all times and never allowed servants to see her face. Another reported that she ate dinner at a table set for 13, with 12 empty chairs for the ghosts she believed joined her every evening. A third newspaper calculated that Sarah had spent over $5 million on the house, a staggering sum equivalent to roughly $150 million today, with no intention of ever declaring the project finished. Sarah never responded to any of these stories. She never issued corrections, never gave interviews, never defended herself against increasingly wild speculation. Her silence made the legend grow even more elaborate. Each retelling added new layers of madness and supernatural terror. The séance room became a chamber of horrors in newspaper accounts. The staircase to nowhere became definitive proof of insanity. The construction itself became evidence of a woman trapped in supernatural delusion, building frantically to outrun death itself. The public devoured these stories with appetite that revealed something dark about American fascination with the wealthy and the strange. This was the Gilded Age sliding into the progressive era, a time when the country was obsessed with millionaires and their eccentricities. Here was Sarah Winchester, a woman with more money than some small nations, spending it all on a house that seemed designed to confuse and disturb anyone who entered. She became a caricature in the popular imagination. The mad widow, the ghost lady, the woman who talked to the dead and built rooms to trap them. But the caricature bore little resemblance to reality. Yes, Sarah was reclusive. Yes, she believed in spiritualism. But so did millions of Americans, including well-respected scientists, authors, and political leaders. Séances were not fringe activities but fashionable social events. The idea that the dead could communicate with the living was mainstream, not madness. Yes, the house was undeniably strange, but Sarah was not incoherent or out of control. She managed a large estate, supervised dozens of workers, handled complex financial matters, maintained correspondence with family members, and operated commercial orchards that produced fruit sold throughout California. She was functional, organized, and completely in control of her unusual project. Many of the house's oddities had practical explanations that newspapers chose to ignore. The shallow staircases accommodated her. Severe arthritis. The multiple bedrooms allowed her to move frequently, a common practice for people with chronic pain seeking comfortable sleeping positions. The small doors and low ceilings were proportioned for a woman who stood barely 5 feet tall. Even the famous doors to nowhere could be explained by the reality of continuous construction. Plans changed, additions were made, old doorways became obsolete, but were left in place rather than being expensively patched over. It was not madness, but the messy reality of building for decades without a fixed master plan. But newspapers did not want practical explanations. They wanted mystery, fear, and stories that confirmed what readers already believed about the corrupting effects of too much money, too much grief, and too much time alone. So the legend crystallized around a simple narrative. Sarah Winchester was a woman literally haunted by the ghosts of everyone killed by her family's rifles. She was building an enormous house to trap these spirits, losing her mind one room at a time in the process. The truth was quieter and more human. Sarah was a widow who had lost her only child and her husband within 15 years. She had inherited a fortune built on violence she had not committed, but from which she benefited every day. She had moved across the country to escape the weight of that inheritance and had found a project that gave structure to her grief while employing hundreds of people and creating something genuinely unique. She kept building not because spirits demanded it, but because building was what she needed to do to keep moving forward through loss that would have destroyed most people. By 1915, Sarah was in her 70s. The construction had slowed noticeably, though it never completely stopped. The house had reached its peak size, and Sarah, tired and aging, still walked the halls alone at night, her cane tapping against wooden floors in a rhythm that echoed through empty corridors. Her hands shook now when she held a pen. The arthritis that had shaped so much of the house's design made it difficult for her to write instructions or sketch new plans. She moved more slowly through the hallways that had once been her kingdom, sometimes needing to stay on the ground floor when her joints hurt too much to climb even her specially designed shallow staircases. The construction crews noticed the change. Instructions came less frequently. Days passed with no new plans, no changes, no orders to tear down and rebuild. Workers continued maintaining what already existed, but the expansion that had defined the property for nearly 30 years had essentially stopped. Sarah spent more time in the conservatory, the room with stained glass windows and a small fountain where afternoon light painted shifting patterns on the floor. Servants said she liked to sit there quietly, not talking, just watching the colored light move across the walls as the sun tracked across the sky. The séance. Room bell still rang at midnight and 2 in the morning, but not every night. Sometimes it was silent for a week. Then it would ring again, 13 chimes cutting through the darkness, and the staff would know Sarah was still seeking whatever she had been seeking for over 30 years. Her niece, Frances Marriott, visited occasionally during these final years. Frances was one of the few family members Sarah maintained contact with, though the visits were brief and formal. Tea in the conservatory, polite conversation about nothing important. Then Sarah would retreat when she grew tired, which was often. Frances later said Sarah seemed smaller with each visit. Not just physically, though age and illness had reduced her to a bird-like figure, but smaller in presence, as if the enormous house had grown so large it had absorbed her, leaving only an echo moving through its halls. In early September 1922, Sarah moved her bedroom one last time. She chose a small, simple room on the ground, floor with plain walls and a single window facing the gardens. Nothing strange, no hidden doors or architectural puzzles, just a quiet space where an old woman could rest. She asked staff to bring only the basics: a bed, a chair, a small table. After decades of filling the house with furniture, artwork, and architectural oddities, Sarah's final room was almost empty. On the night of September 4th, she went to bed as usual. Servants checked on her before retiring and found her awake, sitting up, looking out the window at the moonlit orchard that had surrounded her strange creation for nearly 40 years. She died quietly in her sleep sometime before dawn. No bells rang to mark the moment, no earthquake shook the house, no supernatural signs announced the end. Just an 83-year-old woman alone in a room she had built, passing peacefully in the night. The servants found her in the morning and immediately notified Francis. The foreman told the workers. By afternoon, news had spread through San Jose and beyond. Sarah Winchester was dead. And for the first time in 38 years, the Winchester house was completely, absolutely silent. No hammering, no sawing, no footsteps echoing through corridors that had never known such stillness. The construction that had defined the Winchester house for nearly 4 decades had finally ended, not because the project was complete, but because the only person who understood what it was supposed to become had taken her secrets to the grave. Frances Marriott stood in what had once been the front hallway and tried to comprehend what her aunt had left behind. She had visited dozens of times over the years, but Sarah had always controlled those visits carefully. Tea in the conservatory, brief walks through selected rooms, never a full tour, never an explanation of the house's bewildering layout. Now Sarah was gone, and Frances, as executor of the estate, faced the impossible task of cataloging everything. She brought a team of lawyers, accountants, and appraisers, men with clipboards and measuring tapes whose job was to determine the value of a property unlike anything they had ever encountered. They got lost immediately. The hallways twisted without warning. Doors led to unexpected destinations. Staircases appeared where logic said they should not exist. One appraiser opened what appeared to be a linen closet and found himself staring into a 40-foot drop to the basement below. Another spent 20 minutes trying to return to the entrance and somehow ended up on the 3rd floor instead. Frances hired a carpenter who had worked on the house for 15 years to serve as a guide. Even he struggled to navigate rooms he had personally constructed. Sections he remembered clearly had been walled off or completely reconfigured. The house had changed so frequently that no one, not even the men who built it, could map its current layout with confidence. The inventory process stretched on for weeks. 160 rooms, some fully furnished with expensive pieces, others completely bare. Several rooms had been sealed since the 1906 earthquake, their contents untouched for 16 years. The team eventually stopped trying to count individual features and settled for estimates. Roughly 2,000 doors, 47 fireplaces, 10,000 windows, countless architectural impossibilities. The numbers told only part of the story. The contents revealed even stranger patterns. In one room, investigators found dozens of identical sets of fine china, still in their original boxes, never unpacked or used. Another contained hundreds of bottles of expensive wine covered in decades of dust, purchased and forgotten. Closets overflowed with bolts of fabric and rolls of wallpaper stacked floor to ceiling. Sarah had apparently ordered materials in massive quantities, then lost track of entire shipments. Lumber, nails, glass panes, enough construction supplies to build another mansion entirely, all stored throughout the house as if she had been preparing for decades more of building that would never come. But personal documents were nearly non-existent. No diaries explaining her motivations, no journals revealing her thoughts, no correspondence that shed light on the reasoning behind 38 years of bizarre architectural decisions. Just a few carefully filed letters from family members and basic financial records that revealed nothing about Sarah's inner life. The famous séance room yielded no supernatural artifacts. The 13 hooks were empty. The cabinet contained only the robes servants had mentioned, but nothing occult or mysterious. No spell books, no strange objects, just cloth and empty space that had somehow generated decades of ghost stories. Frances later told reporters she had hoped to find answers somewhere in the maze. Some document or diary entry that would explain the endless construction, the architectural oddities, the choices. That seemed incomprehensible to everyone except Sarah. She found none. What she did discover painted a different picture of her aunt than newspaper accounts had suggested. Receipts showed substantial anonymous donations to hospitals, orphanages, and disaster relief funds. Sarah had quietly given away enormous sums over the years without seeking recognition or publicity. Payroll records listed workers who had remained on the estate for 10, 20, even 30 years, men who had raised families on Sarah's generous wages. One notation showed a pension being paid to an elderly worker who had become too frail to continue his duties. Sarah had kept paying him anyway, supporting him until his death. Letters from employees requesting time off to care for sick relatives showed Sarah's responses, always granting the requests, always with full pay. This was not the correspondence of a madwoman, but evidence of an employer who treated workers as human beings rather than disposable tools. Frances began to understand that the legend bore little resemblance to the reality of who Sarah Winchester had been. Not a terrified recluse building frantically to escape supernatural vengeance, but a woman who had found an unconventional way to process grief while providing stable employment for hundreds of people during economically uncertain times. Still, the house remained a problem. It was enormous, expensive to maintain, and impossible to sell as a residence. Who would want to live in a labyrinth with staircases leading nowhere and doors opening onto walls? The furnishings were auctioned off to pay estate taxes. 5 moving trucks worth of belongings sold to settle debts. What remained was the house itself, empty now and silent, a shell of wood and glass and stone that no longer had any clear purpose. Frances had no idea what to do with such a unique white elephant, so she did what many Americans in the 1920s did with things they could not understand or easily categorize. She turned it into a tourist attraction. The gates opened to paying visitors in 1923, less than a year after Sarah's death. 5 months of preparation had transformed the private residence into a public curiosity. Rooms were cleaned, debris cleared, tour routes established, guides hired, and marketing materials printed. Most importantly, a story had to be chosen. Frances could have presented the house honestly as an architectural oddity, a monument to one woman's unusual approach to grief and creativity. She could have emphasized Sarah's treatment of workers, her charitable giving, or the remarkable craftsmanship evident throughout the structure. But honesty did not sell tickets in the entertainment-hungry 1920s. The marketing campaign leaned heavily into fear and mystery. Advertisements promised visitors the chance to see the mansion built by a woman haunted by the ghosts of those killed by Winchester rifles. Tour guides received instructions to emphasize supernatural elements, the supposed curse, the midnight séances, the bells that rang to summon and dismiss spirits. They told visitors that Sarah built continuously to confuse evil spirits seeking revenge, that she never slept in the same room twice for fear they would find her, that construction workers had heard disembodied voices in empty hallways and seen shadows slip through solid walls. Some elements were based on documented facts. The bells did ring at midnight and 2 in the morning. Construction had continued for 38 years without stopping. Sarah did change bedrooms frequently, but the interpretation was pure ghost story, designed to thrill visitors rather than inform them. The public response exceeded all expectations. Thousands came in the first year alone. Families drove from San Francisco and Los Angeles. Tourists traveling through California added the mystery house to their itineraries. Local teenagers dared each other to take the tour, half hoping to encounter a supernatural presence and half hoping they would not. Tour guides developed a well-rehearsed script that maximized the spooky atmosphere. They led groups through the maze of corridors, pointing out the staircase that climbed into a ceiling, the door that opened onto a deadly drop, the windows that stared into other windows instead of offering views of the outside world. They lowered their voices dramatically in the séance room and mentioned, always in whispers, that some visitors reported feeling unexplained cold spots or hearing mysterious sounds that had no obvious source. Were these supernatural experiences genuine? Some visitors claimed they were. A woman reported feeling an invisible hand touch her shoulder in an empty hallway. A man insisted he heard footsteps following him through the conservatory. Children said they saw faces in the stained glass windows that vanished when looked at directly. Skeptics offered simpler explanations. Old houses naturally creak and groan as wood expands. And contracts. Drafts create temperature variations that feel like cold spots. Stained glass distorts light in ways that can suggest human features. The power of suggestion is strong, especially when people expect to encounter something supernatural. But objective truth mattered less than the experience itself. Visitors wanted to believe the Winchester house was haunted, because if it truly was haunted, that validated Sarah's fears. It meant the curse had been real. The decades of building had served a genuine supernatural purpose, rather than just being the expensive hobby of a grief-stricken widow. The house quickly became one of California's most popular roadside attractions. It appeared in travel guides and automobile club publications. Postcards sold at the gift shop showed the exterior shrouded in morning fog, captioned, "America's Most Haunted Mansion." Sarah's memory underwent a complete transformation in death. During her lifetime, she had been private, misunderstood, occasionally pitied by those who knew her circumstances. After death, she became a legend, the mad widow who tried to build her way out of a supernatural curse, and ultimately failed. Except she had not actually failed by any reasonable measure. Sarah had lived to 83, longer than her husband, longer than many of her contemporaries. She had survived tuberculosis outbreaks, the devastating 1906 earthquake, the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. She had died peacefully in her sleep in a bed of her own choosing, inside a house she had shaped down to the smallest detail. If the supposed curse had claimed she would die when construction stopped, she had already disproven it. Building had slowed for years before her death and ceased entirely in her final weeks, yet nothing supernatural had occurred. No vengeful spirits materialized, no dramatic supernatural reckoning took place. Just natural aging and a quiet passing. But that version of Sarah's story would not have sold admission, tickets, or generated the kind of word-of-mouth publicity that made businesses successful. So the guides continued emphasizing the ghost story, framing Sarah as a victim of supernatural forces rather than a woman who had found an unconventional but effective way to cope with unbearable personal losses. Decades passed. Ownership of the property changed hands multiple times, but each new owner preserved the haunted house narrative while adding their own embellishments. The core message remained constant. This place was cursed, and the woman who built it spent her final decades running from vengeful spirits that could never be appeased. By the 1970s and 1980s, the Winchester Mystery House had become a cornerstone of American paranormal culture. Television shows about ghost hunting featured it prominently. Self-proclaimed psychics visited and claimed to sense overwhelming spiritual energy throughout the building. Books about haunted locations across America almost invariably included a chapter on Sarah Winchester and her endless architectural project. The truth about Sarah's life, quiet and complex and thoroughly human, disappeared beneath layers of manufactured mystery and commercialized fear. But recently, something has begun to shift in how the story gets told, and that shift reveals something important about how we choose to remember the past and what those choices say about who we are. Modern historians and researchers have begun examining Sarah Winchester's life with fresh eyes, looking past the sensationalized ghost stories to uncover what actually happened during those 38 years of construction. What they found challenges nearly everything the popular legend claims about the Winchester Mystery House and its creator. The payroll records tell a remarkable story of progressive labor practices decades ahead of their time. Sarah employed an average of 22 full-time workers throughout the construction period, paying wages significantly above the regional standard. When other employers routinely found excuses to dock pay or delay payments during economic downturns, Sarah's workers received their full wages every Friday without exception. Medical expenses appear frequently in the estate records, But not just for Sarah herself. Payments to doctors for treating workers' injuries, hospital bills for employees' family members, even surgical costs for a laborer's child. These were not legal requirements or standard business practices. Sarah chose to provide healthcare benefits when virtually no other employers did. One entry stands out among hundreds of financial records: monthly pension payments to a maintenance worker who had become too elderly to perform his duties effectively. The payments continued for 3 years until the man's death, long after he could contribute any meaningful work to the project. Sarah kept supporting him simply because it was the right thing to do. The architectural oddities that seem so bizarre to modern visitors often had practical explanations rooted in Sarah's physical limitations and changing construction needs. The famous shallow staircases were not supernatural design choices, but accommodations for severe arthritis that made standard stairs painful or impossible to climb. Medical records confirm Sarah suffered chronic joint pain that worsened significantly with age. The multiple bedrooms throughout the house served a similar function. People with chronic pain often need to change sleeping locations to find comfortable positions, avoid drafts, or stay closer to ground floor facilities when mobility becomes limited. What looked like paranoid behavior to outsiders was actually a sensible adaptation to physical disability. Many doors that supposedly led nowhere were simply obsolete doorways, left over from constantly changing construction plans. When you build continuously for nearly 4 decades, adding wings and reconfiguring spaces, old openings become unnecessary but are often left in place rather than being expensively patched over. This was practical construction management, not architectural madness. The windows that faced other windows instead of providing exterior views brought natural light into interior hallways that otherwise would have been dark tunnels. Given the house's sprawling footprint, many corridors had no access to outside walls. Interior windows solved this lighting problem elegantly. Even the mysterious séance room had mundane explanations for its unusual features. Multiple exits provided fire escape routes, a genuine safety concern in an era of gas lighting and wooden construction. The 13 hooks might have held keys, tools, or household items rather than supernatural paraphernalia. The bell system allowed Sarah to communicate with servants across vast distances without shouting or making exhausting walks through the maze. None of this means Sarah was not spiritual. Documentary evidence confirms she attended spiritualist churches and believed in life after death. The séances almost certainly occurred, but spiritualism in the 1880s and 1890s was mainstream religious practice, not fringe lunacy. Millions of Americans participated in séances. Respected scientists studied mediums. Even presidents consulted spiritualists about major decisions. Sarah's beliefs were not proof of insanity, but evidence that she engaged with the dominant spiritual movement of her era. The construction itself served multiple purposes simultaneously. It provided steady employment during years of severe economic instability when construction jobs routinely disappeared and families went hungry. It gave Sarah a complex project that required daily decisions, ongoing planning, and constant supervision. Rather than fading into quiet widowhood as society expected, she ran a major construction operation for nearly 4 decades. The result was something genuinely lasting. Whatever combination of grief, guilt, spiritual belief, and personal eccentricity motivated Sarah, she created a structure that has employed thousands of people over more than a century and drawn hundreds of thousands of visitors from around the world. Today, the Winchester Mystery House still stands in San Jose, a testament to one woman's extraordinary response to unbearable loss. Whether you see it as a monument to madness or a masterpiece of determination depends entirely on which story you choose to believe. Sarah Winchester spent 38 years building something that defied explanation, employed hundreds of workers, and outlasted everyone who knew the truth about why she never stopped. The hammers fell silent in 1922, but the questions remain as twisted and endless as the hallways themselves.